in Houston said in part, quote, not only did I not get indicted, nobody in my administration got indicted. By the way, it was the only administration in modern history that can be said about. In fact, nobody came close to being indicted, probably because the people who joined us were there for the right reasons. It did seem as if for a time, President Obama, former President Clinton, Secretary of State Clinton, they were a bit more restrained in terms of their public criticism. That seems to be changing. Why?
Well, first of all, there's a day I wouldn't believe I'd say this, but boy, do I miss Barack Obama. I think that there's, a tradition where you want to let the person who comes after you do their job. And I'll say that's with presidents, but it's really with any of us where you want to be helpful, but you'd also want to give them space. But this is just an absurd situation where they, more than anyone, appreciate what's at stake. And they also, more than anyone, understand the powers of the office and the abuse of the office and what could come of that. And I think it's terrific that President Obama came out on the trail towards the end. And I think it's great that they're all speaking. And it's fantastic that Michelle Obama is out there now with her book.
We showed this tweet earlier in the broadcast, that President Trump retweeting this bizarre picture of all of his foils, or many of his foils, behind bars. What was your reaction when you saw that? I assume you've seen it.
Yeah, I don't think it surprises anyone after the news of the last couple of days about Paul Manafort meeting Julian Assange and Roger Stone that Donald Trump has bars on his mind. I think what's amazing to me is that somehow America's oldest president is also its biggest baby. But I have to tell you, sometimes it's reassuring to me when I see him do that, because it's so absurd that no one looks at it worldwide, or the bulk of America who are sane, and thinks, oh, okay, maybe he's not so bad. It's actually helpful, I think, for him to remind so many that he's out of his mind.
Philippe Reines, we'll leave it there. Philippe, thanks for your time, sir.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Checkmate. An American could bring home the title for the first time in more than 50 years at the World.
Could get away with this. MIA right now on Capitol Hill. Senators have just been briefed on what the U.S. knows about the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, but not by the CIA director who actually heard the tape of his murder. Coming up, an insider's view from the former CIA chief, John Brennan. And unopposed, Nancy Pelosi has no competition. Council. Could his latest Twitter tirade break Republican senators' longstanding resistance to passing legislation to protect the Mueller probe? NBC White House correspondent Kristen Welker joins us now with the very...
Him before trial, solitary incarceration, and repeated questioning, even after Manafort denies, shows they are willing to exert unusual pressure that could tempt someone to lie to get out of jail. Now, that really a prebuttal, Andrea, trying to make the case, it seems, that Manafort, if there were any mistruths, was being pushed into that. Of course,
the Mueller investigation, that I think is where the action is. On the floor.
Sorry about this, I went too far.
Caucus is doing today.
Right.
You're on it.
I went entirely too far. Did I ever? All right.
Q1. Senators on Yemen and Saudi Arabia. But CIA Director Gina Haspel was noticeably absent, despite demands from lawmakers to hear from her about the Saudi murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
I think it was a basic mistake on the part of the administration not to have the CIA director brief us today.
Nobody was happy that she wasn't there, put it that way. Not having Gina Haspel, the CIA director, at this briefing is a cover-up.
The most persuasive presence in this briefing was the empty chair.
The administration instead trying to switch the focus today to why the U.S., in their view, needs Saudi Arabia as an ally against Iran. Joining me now is John Brennan, the former director of CIA. He's now NBC's senior national security and intelligence analyst, and I can't think of a better person to talk to today. It's well known that you were a former station chief in Saudi. You know the Saudis well. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, as LBJ said memorably. You can be an ally of Saudi Arabia with mutual interests in Syria, against Iran, against Iranian terrorism, and still draw a line against the murder of a Washington-based American resident, journalist, Washington Post journalist, arguably ordered by the leadership, and the other excesses of what's been going on in the civil war in Yemen.
Yes, Andrea, I don't think anybody on either side of the aisle in Congress is arguing to destroy the U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship, which is strong. But as you point out, there's a difference between preserving that relationship and holding the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, to account for what, by all accounts, is his involvement in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And the failure of this administration to do that, I think, sends a very bad signal, not just to Saudi Arabia, that they can get away with this, but also to other despots around the world who may decide to take these actions, including against U.S. persons, American journalists. I mean, this is outrageous. And the fact that Donald Trump and now Mike Pompeo also, in his Wall Street Journal op-ed, are making excuses and trying to defend what I think is the indefensible, I think it should outrage senators, again, both Democrats and Republicans.
I want to read to you something that the president said to Phil Rucker and Josh Hawley in the Washington Post yesterday in their interview. This is similar to what he has said in the last week or so publicly about the CIA's assessment and about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. He asked about Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. I know him well, the Crown Prince. And by the way, never did business with them, never intend to do business with them, he brings up parenthetically. But I just feel that it is very, very, very important to maintain that relationship. It's very important to have Saudi Arabia as an ally if we're going to stay in that part of the world. Now, are we going to stay in that part of the world? And he has frequently gone on to make outlandish claims about the Saudi arms deals. Just to ignore the fact-checking of all those inflated numbers right now. Why is he so... what is the effect, I should say, of what the president is doing in questioning the analysis and questioning the Crown Prince's role and then, brushing it off?
Well, I think this is very typical of Donald Trump, that he will disparage any type of assessment or analysis, whether it be MBS's, Mohammed bin Salman's involvement in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, or whether it was Russian interference in the election. Anything that does not comport with his pursuit of his own agenda and politics. And unfortunately, they have a relationship now with Mohammed bin Salman that they're trying to preserve. And I think it's going to be to the detriment of the U.S.-Saudi relationship over time. So I think everybody wants to preserve this relationship, but the Saudis, and particularly King Salman, has to purge the country of the cancer that has taken root in the country.
What about Gina Haspel not showing up today? This was a briefing that, ordinarily there would be a top figure from CIA at this kind of all-Senate briefing.
Well, I think what they're looking for is the intelligence that they need to take into account as they try to formulate policies and legislation. And not having either Gina Haspel, the director of CIA, or Dan Coats, the director of national intelligence, participating in that briefing, I think, as the Senator Durbin said, the empty chair speaks a lot. And whether or not that was a direction on the part of Donald Trump himself or some other person like John Bolton, Gina's absence and Dan Coats' absence is noticeable. And I think it just demonstrates that this administration does not want the intelligence to come out. And that's why I think the intelligence committees should demand that the CIA assessment be declassified and publicly released so all can see.
Now, I want to just clear up terms of art here, because the CIA makes an assessment based on their best analysis. And they say with whatever confidence that assessment is delivered. It's never a 100% conclusion. So when the president says, well, they didn't really decide, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, he's using the wiggle room that is always the case with a CIA assessment. It can be low confidence, high confidence, relatively high confidence. Am I correct about those terms?
Well, if the press accounts are correct, and they say that CIA has determined with high confidence that Mohammed bin Salman was involved in some manner in this killing, that is a rather straightforward and strong CIA assessment, which is based on intelligence nuggets as well as the expertise that CIA brings to the table on what they know about Saudi Arabia, what they know about Mohammed bin Salman, what they know about the actions, whether or not this is information that CIA gets on its own or relies on its partners overseas, whether it be the Turks, whether it be others. And therefore, coming to that conclusion of high confidence, it was an affirmative assessment in terms of the involvement of Mohammed bin Salman in the killing.
I wanted to show you what happened when our colleague Hallie Jackson was trying to pin John Bolton down yesterday in the briefing room, the National Security Advisor, as to whether or not he had listened to the tape, that we understand Gina Haspel has listened to the audio tape of that murder.
No, I haven't listened to it. And I guess I should ask you, why do you think I should? What do you think I'll learn from it?
Well, you're the National Security Advisor. You might have access to that sort of intelligence.
Yeah. How many in this room speak Arabic?
You have access to an interpreter?
Well, you want me to listen to it? What am I going to learn from? I mean, if they were speaking Korean, I wouldn't learn any more from it either.
The interpreter would be able to tell you what's going on.
Then I can read a transcript too.
Okay, so you don't think it's important to hear that as a National Security Advisor?
I'm just trying to make the point that everybody who says, why don't you listen to the tape, unless you speak Arabic, what are you going to get from it?
You were a counterterror advisor in the NSC to the president before you were a CIA director. What do you say to a national security advisor not wanting to listen to that audio tape, whether or not it's in a...
I'm going to tell you what you'd get in it. You would get the full dynamics of the severity of the struggling. You would get the dynamics of the resistance. You would get the dynamics of the clarity that it in actuality occurred. And of course you would get the dynamics of his actual death as he was gurgling in his own blood. That's what you would get out of it. In other words, I go through various programs sometimes purposely that's either speaking Spanish or Arabic or other types of languages. And a lot of times, even though you can't understand what they're saying because of you not having an interpreter there, because you can see their actions, you can put two and two together in understanding what they actually intended on saying, even though they were speaking in a language that was foreign to you. That's what you get out of it. And that's what you're supposed to get out of it anytime